السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين من تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. So inshallah we are been almost like over a month of a break. 6 weeks that we haven't done the journey to the hereafter class. And unfortunately, one of the side effects of not coming here for too long is people stop showing up. The numbers drop. So we start with 50, end up with 3. So we'll pick up. Today, inshallah, we're going to be talking, or us going to the last chapter, after discussing going through the stages of death, the resurrection, the minor signs and the major signs of the Day of Judgment, Kubra and Sughra, and then also talking about the rising from the grave, and then the Hashr, and then also the tribulations that we see on the Day of Judgment, and also the different stations that occur after the Day of Judgment, whether it is receiving our books, crossing the Sirat, and then we also talked about the hellfire, and then the people of the hellfire, may Allah protect us from it, and talked about the types of punishment in it and description of the hellfire. And inshallah we left for the last part, inshallah the best part, which is talking about Jannah. And inshallah I didn't want to do it like I did with the hellfire. So the hellfire we did in one class, but when Jannah I want to take a bit more time with it, because in the end, this is what we all seek and we all desire. And there's a lot of descriptions that are associated with Jannah. And so I'm going to take my time to kind of go through this, and so it'll take maybe 2 to 3 classes at least, inshallah. And so when we talk about the Jannah, obviously it is the they talk about they say it's the Jannah al-Azim wa thawab al-Jazim. It is the great reward and the immense immense good that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had prepared for His righteous servants. And it's a pleasure that is complete in every single way. That is compared, of course, and is different than the pleasures that we have in this world life. Because the pleasures we have in this worldly life is not absent from any sort of traces or impurities of some sort of negativity with it. Because, for example, any type of enjoyment that you experience will always be transient, will pass. And that sometimes brings some sort of sadness, or there's always some sort of side effect that is compared, on the other hand, to the pleasures of the hereafter and Jannah. It is a na'im, a pleasure that has no traces or any impurities of anything whatsoever. It's the most complete form of enjoyment and pleasure that is unparalleled unparalleled to anything we have enjoyed in this world. And for example, this one, the Prophet ﷺ had mentioned in a hadith Qudsi that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, أَعْدَدْتُ لِعِبَادِي مَنْ عَيْنٍ رَأَتْ وَلَا أُذُنٍ سَمَعَتْ وَلَا خَطَرَ عَلَى قَلْبِ بَشَرٍ. He said, subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the hadith Qudsi, I have prepared for my pious slaves what an eye has not seen, or an ear has ever heard, or never crossed the heart of a human being. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, read if you will, فَلَا تَعْلَمُ نَفْسٌ مَا أُخْفِيَ لَهُم مِّن قُرَّةِ أَعْيُنٍ. So the translation is that, and no soul knows what has been hidden for them of comfort of eyes, means satisfaction, as a reward for what they used to do. And so this is the beautiful verse in the Quran, فَلَا تَعْلَمُ نَفْسٌ مَا أُخْفِيَ لَهُم مِّن قُرَّةِ أَعْيُنٍ. That the description of the pleasure is described in the hereafter that is very satisfying, that is very comfortable to the eye, or comfort of the eye, soothing to the eye. And if you really want to understand the comparison between the immense pleasure of the hereafter compared to this world, you can just reflect on some of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. He mentioned several of them, but I just mentioned one part of the hadith, and this is narrated by some of the scholars from books of hadith. For example, it was mentioned in Fath al-Bari, and Imam Nawawi mentioned when he was explaining Sahih Muslim, the Prophet ﷺ said, مَوْضِعُ صَوْتٍ فِي الْجَنَّةِ خَيْرٌ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا وَمَا فِيهَا. So he said, so مَوْضِعُ صَوْتٍ, which means, so it's referring to a whip or a lash, right? Whether it's made out of a very thin stick. So that volume of space, he's saying that amount of space in Jannah is khayr, which is better than the whole world and what's in it. So when we think of space, that's not very large space, is it? Right? It's a very small area. So he's saying that small area in Jannah is much better Khayrun is more better and more than in what's in this entire world and what's in it. So this tells you how much enjoyment and pleasure really it is. And so this is why in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, entering Jannah and being safe or rescued from the hellfire in the eyesight of Allah ta'ala and in His decree is what is truly considered the victory, the ultimate victory. And it's considered the great triumph and the greatest salvation. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَمَنْ زُحْزِحَ عَنِ النَّارِ وَأُدْخِلَ الْجَنَّةَ فَقَدْ فَازَ. Whomever has been drawn away from the hellfire and admitted into the hellfires, into paradise, then he has attained his desire. He has attained, he has been successful. He has been, he has triumphed. He's been victorious. And so this is the true measurement of what true success is. And this is important to mention because in the world we live in, we always try to measure what is a successful person. And unfortunately, they're always based on materialistic things, one way or another. We think of a successful person as what? Who is a successful person, Sheikh?
As we see in societies, like rich people or...
All right, richness. What else?
Or very educated.
Education.
Worldly education.
Worldly education. Is that it, those two things?
Many things.
Many, money and worldly education.
Money, and then sometimes health, like athletes or something.
Athletics, good, right? So all these achievements. So we think people are successful by their achievements, but almost all they entirely are worldly achievements. But in the eyesight of Allah Ta'ala, if you attain all these things and you still enter the hellfire, you have done nothing. And so in the eyesight of Allah Ta'ala, He tells us truly what is the true success. And it's that you be removed from the hellfire, being saved from the hellfire and enter Jannah. This is why the Prophet ﷺ would mention that perhaps a person who is destitute, right, the people neglect, in the eyesight of Allah Ta'ala, he is better than 1,000 individuals or multiple individuals who have status and ability and achieve multiple things. Right? So the measurement of what we consider success is not really the true measurement. The true measurement is what we are in the eyesight of Allah Ta'ala. إِنَّ أَكْرَمَكُمْ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ أَتْقَاكُمْ. The most noble of you in the eyesight of Allah Ta'ala is those who have taqwa. And that is the true measurement of things. And that gives us comfort, is that no matter what stage in life we're in, if we aren't able to achieve many of the other things, but we have achieved the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so this is what really matters. Now it doesn't mean that we should not try to be successful in our lives. No, on the other hand, it's one of the most beautiful qualities of a Muslim, that when they perform something, they perfect it. And if you do that, naturally you become very successful in what you do. And this is why the pious, the pious predecessors from before us, whether it's from the Sahaba or the Tabi'een, they were successful in the things that they have done, in addition to their piety and their high status. And so this does not negate the other. But we're just talking about it in a situation where we should not belittle those who we might think are not successful, because in the eyesight of Allah Ta'ala, they might be better from those who are successful and heedless. And unfortunately, it's the nature of this time that we live in, that many of those who are successful, you find that they are heedless, right? And they are negligent and forgetful of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. We're talking about Muslims, we're not Muslims. But those over the higher classes, you find many of them not practicing, just because of how they view themselves in society and status. So you have to be careful of that. And so that's the true measurement of success. So inshallah, just to go forward from here, we will divide what we're going to talk about into 5 sections. Okay, we're going to divide what we're talking about into 5 sections. The first one we're going to try, hopefully to finish today if we have time, is talking about the entrance into Jannah. Okay, so those who are entering Jannah. So we're going to talk about the intercession, the shafa'ah. We're going to talk about the purification of the people of Jannah before they enter Jannah. This is all in that same section, about those who are first going to enter Jannah, and then those, which include those who will enter without any reckoning or judgment, and those who are going to be the sinners from the believers when they enter Jannah, and the last person who enters Jannah. So all this is just talking about entering into Jannah. The following section we're going to talk about the description of Jannah itself. What is it like? It's almost like a walk through Jannah. We're going to talk about its doors, what they look like, the sizes of it, the levels of Jannah, the soil of Jannah, the rivers in it, the wells or the springs, the palaces, the trees, its fruits, all these things is in terms of a physical description of Jannah. Followed by that, we're going to talk about which is the third section, Ashab al-Jannah. So the people of Jannah themselves. So talk about the means that we need to take to enter Jannah, and in the reality it's something that's not easy, and we talk about why, and then how the people of Jannah, they inherit more than their position. So there's a bit additional stuff for them, and then we're going to talk about those who are the considered the weak people of this earth, their status in Jannah, and then always the debate, the discussion of which is more numerous, men or women in Jannah. We're going to touch on that a little bit. And then those who had died before before they're not discerning, but they're legally liable, right? Before taklif, what is their position, whether from the Muslim children or the non-Muslim children? And those, the amount of people who actually enter Jannah, or the people who have been given glad tidings that they will enter Jannah. And just different talks about that. And then the fourth one, we're going to talk about the pleasures that the people of Jannah, the type of experience that they feel, right? The na'im that they experience. But also in the following chapter, we're going to talk about that specific bounties or pleasures that they experience, whether it's from the food and drink that they have, what they decorate themselves with, they adorn themselves with, their bedding, their clothing, their gathering, what they hope for, the most pleasure they experience, their tasbih and takbir, the acts of worship that they perform, and what is the best thing they were ever given, and what is their last form of dua that they perform. So we're going to divide into those 5 chapters. So if you notice, it's going to take a bit of a few classes. I'm estimating at least 3, but maybe 4, Allah. Alright, so today inshallah we're going to start with entering Jannah. And so this is after after we talked about the hellfire, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from it. We're starting to talk about the pleasure of the Jannah and the abode of the believers. And this is the abode or the final place that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had promised those who are obedient to Him. And so we naturally have a bit of a longing and desire to know about information because we desire it. After we heard about the punishment of the hellfire, we want as much as we can to be rescued from it. And obviously when we hear of the Jannah, we want to enter it. And this is something that's kind of interesting because when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first created the Jannah and the hellfire, He had asked Jibreel to look at Jannah and to look at the hellfire. And so when Jibreel had looked at the hellfire, he told Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala nobody would ever desire to enter it. And then when he looked at the Jannah, he said nobody would ever desire not to enter it. Okay, so this is just because of the comparisons between both of them. Alright, now when we talk about entering Jannah, obviously, at that time, if you think about it, I'm just going to bring back the imagery of what's happening on the Day of Judgment, is when people have received their books, and they are given glad tidings, and they are divided into different groups. They have crossed the Sirat, and now they are being divided into groups. They are being taken as delegates with all the prestigious or the type of treatment that you give a proper delegate. And they are being led to Jannah. You can feel their emotions about it and how the angels kind of receive them. And when the doors open, you can just imagine all these things. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had mentioned, was mentioned as one verse before we go into something else. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَسِيقَ الَّذِينَ اتَّقَوْا رَبَّهُمْ إِلَى الْجَنَّةِ زُمَرًا حَتَّى إِذَا جَاءُوهَا فُتِحَتْ أَبْوَابُهَا وَقَالَ لَهُمْ خَزَنَتُهَا سَلَامٌ عَلَيْكُمْ طِبْتُمْ فَادْخُلُوهَا خَالِدِينَ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, but those who feared their Lord, who had taqwa of Him, they will be driven to paradise in groups. So zumara, which means groups. And what's interesting about zumara, you don't call one group as zumar, but it's when they are one group followed by another group, followed by a third and a fourth. So there are multiple groups. So they're collected and they are driven to Jannah. Once they reach the gates, they will be opened, and the keepers of the gates will say, Salamun alaykum, peace be upon you. You have become pure. Tibtu, right? You have become purified, pure. So enter to the abide eternally therein. So enter into paradise to live there and abide in it forever. Now, of course, before we are able to enter Jannah, there's something that happens before that. what happens is that after the people have reached Jannah, the doors are closed. Right? They're not open. And so once the believers get to the Jannah, they start having shura between them. Whom they should ask to get permission for them to enter Jannah. So there's two things, right? There's permission to enter Jannah, and then there's also for the doors of Jannah to be opened. And so once they cross the Sirat, and we're going to talk about the Qantara later on, and they're ready to enter Jannah, they're sitting there and waiting, they're going to be looking and discussing who can we ask to intercede on their behalf so that we would enter Jannah. And so what's going to happen is that they're going to head towards Adam alayhi salam. You remember when we talked about in the day of standing, Yawm al-Hashr, when they're standing there for 50,000 years, they want the judgment to start, and so they start going to Adam alayhi salam and then to the following messengers. The same thing will happen again. And so they will go to Adam alayhi salam, and then to Nuh, and then Ibrahim, and then Musa and Isa, and then to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, similar to they have done previously in the Mahshar, before the judgment itself starts. And the evidence from that comes from a hadith from Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Ana awwalun nas yashfa' fil Jannah." I'm the first of people to intercede in Jannah, or for Jannah. وَأَنَا أَكْثَرُ أَنْبِيَاءِ تَبْعًا, and I'm the most of the prophets who would have followers. In another hadith, also narrated by Imam Muslim, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Ana awwal shafi' fil Jannah." I'm the first to intercede in Jannah. And Imam Muslim also had narrated another hadith that when Allah, like the Prophet ﷺ said, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would gather the believers until the Jannah is brought. So they will come to Adam alayhi salam and they say, "Oh, our father Adam, ask for the Jannah for us to be opened." And so he would say, وَهَلْ أَخْرَجَكُم مِّنَ الْجَنَّةِ إِلَّا خَطِيئَةَ بِكُمْ Adam. Isn't it not that what had brought you out of Jannah is your mistake of Adam, your father Adam? لَسْتُ بِصَاحِبِ ذَلِكَ. I'm not the person who can do this. Go to Ibrahim. And so, he's the Khalil of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so Ibrahim alayhi salam, he'll say, "I'm not the one for it. I was only a Khalil from afar, beloved of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from min wara'i wara', right? From afar. I was beloved of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from afar." So he thinks of himself, and this is from his humility and humbleness, that he is not close enough, right, to ask for such a thing. And so this is from his humbleness and humility, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he says, "Go to Musa alayhi salam, for he is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had spoke to him, كَلَّمَهُ تَكْلِيمًا, spoke to him in speech." And so they will go to Musa alayhi salam, and he'll say, I'm not for it. Go to Isa, for he is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he had, and the spirit of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning from the spirits that belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so Isa alayhi salam will say, I'm not the person for that. Go to Mohammed sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would get up and ask for permission. However, before entering Jannah, so this is just an intercession to enter Jannah. But you have to remember, before that, and I'm not going in a specific order, but I'm trying to just give you imagery, and I'm moving a bit in steps. But before we're able to do that, we have to understand that nobody will enter Jannah unless they are completely pure. Because only the pure will enter Jannah. And so we have to be purified. And so there is a station where the believers will be purified from things that would cause animosity between one another. Because obviously there are some traces that might be remaining in our hearts because from our interaction with one another. As human beings, once somebody might have said a word, maybe unintentionally, that harmed somebody else, or whether it's even intentionally, there is some things that might have happened between the believers, and so that needs to be cleansed from their hearts. Interactions or manners or shortcomings from the obligations and the likes of that. And so this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala purifies all of us, so that when we enter Jannah, we would not have any ill feelings. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَنَزَعْنَا مَا فِي صُدُورِهِم مِّنْ غِلٍّ إِخْوَانًا عَلَى سُرُرٍ مُتَقَابِلِينَ, right? And we removed from their hearts, ghil, which means kind of hatred or animosity from their hearts is removed, so that there will be brothers facing each other on their sari is the chairs that they sit in, the huge chairs, similar to the thrones of the kings. So where does this happen though? Where does this purification happen?
You said before doors are open, so probably because you said the pound of Kausar would be there, so they will drink from it, or they
Okay, so it doesn't happen there. So the Kawthar, there's a difference in opinion, is Kawthar before the bridge of Sirat or after it. We said it seems like many of the scholars say it's after it. However, they're just drinking from it because of the thirst, and this is the first of pleasures, that they would not feel thirsty afterwards. But this is not when they're purified.
so maybe they were shown hellfire, so they get the scare of it. So
They'll be shown already, they cross the Sirat, ya Sheikh. We're crossing over the hellfire, right? No, that's good guesses. So you're right, obviously it is before entering Jannah.
yeah.
But where exactly? What's it called? It's called Al-Qantara. It's called Al-Qantara. So this happens in Qantara. And so the Qantara happens after you pass the Sirat, the bridge on top of Jahannam, and whomever falls in it, and the hypocrites, they stay behind, and the disobedient or the sinners, they're going to get punished, or some might fall into it. And so whomever passes from the believers to the other side, they reach this Qantara, and some of the scholars say it's another form of bridge that you have to cross. It's not like the bridge of the Sirat. It's just another bridge you need to cross to get to the Jannah. And you are going to remain on that bridge. We're going to remain on that bridge until, so it's an independent bridge, until we are purified from our sins. So this, it's called Tahdhib wa Tanqiyah, right? Purification and Tahdhib, which means, what's the best word for Tahdhib?
Manners?
No. I'm trying to think of this context. It's slipping my mind. Oh, I can't think of a word right now. Inshallah, I'll remember it later on. Yeah, I don't have a good word for it right now. And this is mentioned by Imam Bukhari, rahimahullah, right? So Imam Bukhari, he's mentioned based on the hadith of Sa'id al-Khudri, that the Prophet ﷺ said, يَخْلُصُ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ مِنَ النَّارِ فَيُسْحَبُونَ فَيُحْبَسُونَ عَلَى قَنْطَرَ بَيْنَ الْجَنَّةِ وَالنَّارِ. So the Prophet ﷺ said, يَخْلُصُ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ مِنَ النَّارِ, they will be, يَخْلُص, which means they will be rescued or removed, right, from the hellfire, which means that they'll be away from it. فَيُحْبَسُونَ عَلَى قَنْطَرَ بَيْنَ الْجَنَّةِ وَالنَّارِ, they will be trapped between an area, and قَنْطَرَ, between Jannah and the hellfire. فَيَقْتَصُّ لِبَعْضِهِمْ مِنْ بَعْضٍ مَظَالِمْ كَانَتْ بَيْنَهُمْ فِي الدُّنْيا. And so qisas, you know what qisas means?
Yeah.
So you take, so when somebody does something to you, تقتص منه. So if somebody hit you, you hit them back, right? And so this is called qisas. So يقتص بعضهم لبعض, from one another, حتى إذا هذبوا ونقوا, until if they are purified, أذن لهم في دخول الجنة, they were permitted to enter Jannah. والذي نفس محمد بيده لأحدهم أهدى بمنزله في الجنة منه بمنزله كان في الدنيا. And so the Prophet ﷺ said, once they're purified, they enter Jannah, and from whom his soul of Muhammad is in his hand, each one of them would know his place, his house, his abode in Jannah, more than he knows his house or his abode in this world. We never get lost trying to find our houses, right? And so he says, in Jannah, we know our houses more than we know of it about in this world. And Ibn Hajar, rahimahullah, when he's explaining this in Hadith al-Bukhari, he said that once the believers are rescued from the hellfire, once they pass it, which means that they have been rescued or from falling into it, they've been secured from falling into it. After they pass the Sirat, they'll be purified. Now, once this tathhir happens, this purification happens, the believers get divided into groups, multiple groups. So, what is this division based on?
Cleanliness or piety?
Piety. That's an opinion, yes. Based on their deeds and qualities. And so, there'll be independent groups. And so, for example, the scholars will be with the scholars, right? The ones who do, battle for the sake of Allah, they'll be in groups. Those who give sadaqah, quite often they'll be in groups. So this is a characteristic that they do more often than other characteristics. Because it's very natural for us to have inclination towards one deed or another. Some people it's just easier to do one deed more than another. Some people, for example, it's more easy for them to give charity. Others, it's more easy for them to do qiyam al-layl. Others fasting. Others seeking knowledge. And so those qualities that they have the most, it doesn't mean that they don't do other things, but just this is one that they have the most. They'll be grouped in those groups. And so the ones who give sadaqah will be together, and those who do the nawafil, that they continue to do it all the time, they'll be together. So they say, كل أصحاب عمل اشتهروا به, right? Whatever you are most known for, you'll be grouped with it, and what you busied yourself, and what is more if you do from it. And because the Jannah are different doors, based on these different actions. And so they differ based on the actions that they busy themselves with. And so I mentioned before that Zumar is talking about waves, right? Waves of groups, one after another. And so Ibn Kathir rahimahullah, he said Zumara jama'a ba'd jama'a, right? One group after another. And so he would say, rahimahullah, he said al-abrar, followed by the ones who are less, and then less and less. Each group based on their what's appropriate for them. And so the prophets and the siddiqeen are with the prophets and the siddiqeen, and then the shuhada are with the likes of the shuhada, and the scholars are with the likes of the scholars, and their aqrana, which means they're kind of like their mates, right? Of their likes. And so each, they say sanf, each category they're grouped together. Right, now once we talk about that, and so now we have been purified, and then we got to the Jannah, and then we asked the Prophet ﷺ to intercede on behalf for the Jannah to open. And the doors of the Jannah, there's another session, are only opened first to the Prophet ﷺ. The next question is, who are those that first enter the Jannah? What are their qualities? And we know this hadith that the Prophet ﷺ had mentioned that, of course, obviously the first human being to enter Jannah, period, is who?
The poor?
No.
Himself.
The Prophet ﷺ. Right? Because we said he will knock, and the angel will say, who's knocking? He said, it's me. And he says, I've been ordered not to open the door except for you. So obviously the first one to enter the Jannah from the human beings is the Prophet ﷺ. And then the ummah of the Prophet ﷺ is the first of ummah to enter. This is why he says ﷺ, so I'm going to mention this in hadith. So he said, أنا أول من يقرع باب الجنة. I'll be the first to knock on the doors of Jannah. And he said, آتي باب الجنة فأستفتح. I come to the doors of Jannah and I ask for it to be open. And the guard of the Jannah, the gate of Jannah, will say, who are you? So the Prophet will say, Mohammed. And he will respond, he'll say, for you I've been ordered not to open the door except for you. And then the Prophet said, نحن الآخرون الأولون يوم القيامة. Right? We are the last, but the first on the Day of Judgment, which means we are the last of the ummahs. Because if you think of the previous ummahs before us, there were multiple ummahs before us. However, we are the last of the ummahs, but we are going to be the first on the Day of Judgment. We will be the first to enter Jannah. And another hadith, Sunan Abi Dawud, Abu Hurairah said, the Prophet said that Jibreel came to me, Atani Jibreel, and he showed me the door of Jannah from which my ummah would enter. And Abu Bakr said, Ya Rasulullah, O Messenger of Allah, I would have loved that I be with you so that I would look at it. And so the Prophet ﷺ said, أَمَّا إِنَّكَ أَبُو بَكْرَ أَوَّلُ مَا يَدْخُلُ الْجَنَّةَ مِنْ أُمَّتِي. So he said, ﷺ, for my ummah, Abu Bakr, you will be the first to enter the Jannah. Okay. And so we know the first human being, from the human beings in general, is the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and from the first individuals of the ummah of the Prophet ﷺ, it is Abu Bakr. However, there are groups from the first groups, Zumra, from the first groups to enter Jannah, are those who are the forerunners, right, at the forefront, who have the highest levels of Iman and Taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they did the most of actions, and they were the ones who were the most steadfast on the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, on the truth. And so they would enter Jannah in one line. Right? I'm going to mention this hadith, and all together Jannah in one line, and that can tell you how wide the gates of Jannah are. And And he says, the Prophet said, and I mentioned this hadith, he said, أول زمرة تلج الجنة صورتهم على صورة القمر ليلة البدر. So the first group to enter Jannah, صورتهم, their image, is a similar image to the moon and a complete moon night, like in a full moon. It's called Badr. See how bright it is and beautiful it is? So the Prophet is describing how bright they are, right? How beautiful they are. And Sahih Bukhari, the Prophet had mentioned, he said, لَيَدْخُلَنَّ الْجَنَّةَ مِنْ أُمَّتِي 70,000 أو 700,000 لا يدخل أولهم حتى يدخل آخرهم وجوههم على صورة القمر ليلة البدر. So this hadith further describes who these people are. So he said, those are the 70,000 from my ummah. They would enter Jannah. The first one of them does not enter except his, their last enter. So they all enter together. In another narration, they all hold hands. Because this shows the great bond and love between them, the brotherhood between them, even if they don't know each other. But they have that one quality. They're from the 70,000 that will enter Jannah. The face is beautiful and bright. And the Prophet ﷺ, in another hadith, he had mentioned, he said, those 70,000, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the Prophet ﷺ, with each one of them, another 70,000. So the hadith says, like the Prophet ﷺ said, I've been given 70,000 from my ummah that would enter Jannah without reckoning. Their face is so bright as the full moon, and it's in the middle of the moon, which means the night of the full moon. Their heart is upon the heart of a single person. So in unity, in vision, they all are on one heart of an individual. فاستزدت ربي عز وجل فزادني مع كل واحد 70,000. So I asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to increase them. So He increased with each one of them 70,000. So what's the total? 4.9 billion. Okay. Now there's a bit of another description of what are those qualities, right? So who are these 70,000, right? What is their qualities?
First they are ummah from Prophet's ummah.
Yes. So we want to know what's their qualities. Why? What's the qualities of those people who enter 70,000 without reckoning? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us among them. Say Ameen. But what is their qualities?
Sorry to interrupt. Which class is this, please? Is this a class?
Yes, but I think you're looking for one at the end of the hall in the library.
The fiqh of worship?
Oh no, this is here.
Is it?
Yes, it is.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I
No.
thought it started at 2.
No, it does. We'll start in 15 minutes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Simple answer would be all muttaqeen.
Yes, but they're from the muttaqeen, but they'll have an added quality. So this comes from the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ when he was talking about, so it's mentioned in Sahih Bukhari, when he described those 70,000, but he was talking about how the different ummahs were presented to the Prophet ﷺ. So this is, if I remember correctly, it was in his journey to the ascending to in Mi'raj, right? Ascending in Mi'raj. So the Prophet said, "Uradat alayhi al-ummah," right? That the nations were presented to me. فأخذ النبي يمر معه الأمة, and so and a prophet would pass with his ummah. And so there were prophets that passed with them a few individuals, and prophets that passed with them only 10 people, and then prophets that passed with them only 5. So this is their entire ummah. So only between those three numbers accepted that da'wah. And then one would come with only one individual. And then he said, I looked up and I saw this huge, large darkness, right? Sawad, this is referring to a large number of individuals. That's like a darkness. And he told Jibreel, are those my ummah? So the Prophet ﷺ said, no. However, look at the horizon. And so he looked and he saw even a larger group of people. Sawad akbar, right? Kathir. And he said, those are your ummah. And he said, وَهَؤُلَاء, and those among them are 70,000. In front of them, there is no reckoning for them or punishment. And so the Prophet ﷺ said, why? And so he said, كَانُوا لَا يَكْتَوُونَ وَلَا يَسْتَغْفُونَ وَلَا يَتَغَيَّرُونَ. So those are 3 forms of things that they did not do. And so كَانُوا لَا يَكْتَوُونَ, which means that they did not do kay. Kay is a form of burning, a form of treatment using burning. like a method of burning, whether it has to do with sealing, like, burning some sort of veins and arteries, but it's a method of treatment. لا يكتوون ولا يسترقون. لا يسترقون, which means they do not request ruqya. Okay, they do not request ruqya. ولا يتطيرون, which means this is referring to having or inclining or acting upon omens. And so this has to do refer to at the time of Jahiliyyah, they used to act upon omens. For example, when a person would travel, they would release a bird. If it flew to the left, they looked at it as a bad omen, right? And if it flew to the right, it was kind of like a good omen. And if they flew straight, it was something else. So these individuals did not do that. And so Jibreel followed, he says, وَعَلَىٰ رَبِّهِمْ يَتَوَكَّلُونَ. However, upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they rely and depend. And so it's describing, so they don't do this, they don't do kay, and they don't request for istirqa, like ruqya. However, it doesn't mean that they do not do ruqya from themselves. They do it. وَلَا يَتَطَيَّرُونَ, and they don't have these bad omens. Because why? Because they completely depend on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These things don't faze them. One can ask, but what's wrong with asking for ruqya? Usually asking for ruqya because sometimes our hearts might cling to the effect of that individual, right? They might depend on that individual a little bit. Especially if that person, they usually do ruqya for free. Usually, whoever does ruqya does it for free. And so there's a bit of a gratitude that is there associated. But those individuals don't have that. But once again, it doesn't mean they don't do ruqya upon themselves. And also doesn't mean that asking for ruqya is haram. It doesn't mean that. Right? It's not the case. And so this is the great dependence on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because they depend on Him. They don't want their hearts to cling to any human being or anything else, or at the creation other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so they don't do all these things. And Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah, he said, he said that perhaps those individuals that their tafweed, right, that they leave things up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the dependence on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has been completed. And so they did not push away what has befall them except by depending on Allah. They did not seek other means from other creations. Now, I have to mention a comment. Remember we said the 70,000 individuals, so it's 4.9 billion. The scholars differed on their interpretation of the hadith. So some said that literally that's the number. The number is 4.9 billion will enter the Jannah without any reckoning or any punishment from the hellfire. And so that number is specified, and that is meant. The other interpretation, they say no, that specific number is not perhaps intended, but rather it is what's intended is that they are large in numbers. Because in the Arabic language, when they say 70, 70 alf, they use that word to indicate plentiness or large numbers. And so the other opinion is that it's referring that there's a lot of them, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would allow all of them to enter Jannah from this ummah. And so I'm just mentioning this because those interpretations are mentioned there. But either or, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us from among them. Alright, now, how much time do we have? Alright, we're just going to mention something quickly. So, because we're talking about from those who would enter Jannah first, from the groups, from among the people who would enter Jannah first, generally people who are poor would enter Jannah before those who are rich. Why is that?
They have already suffered a lot in dunya, and
Okay, they already suffered a lot in dunya.
so they kind of deserve.
Deserve to enter first.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's fine.
that's fine. The Prophet mentioned this. He said, "Inna fuqara al-muhajirin yasbiquna al-aghniya yawm al-qiyamah ila al-jannah b'40 kharifa." Right, that the poor from the muhajirin will be ahead of the rich on the day of judgment by 40 years. And he specifically, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam had mentioned the poor of the muhajirin, because this is a word for them, because they were among the first to believe in the Prophet ﷺ. And their truthfulness and honesty is reflected by how much they endured the poverty, because they had to leave all their belongings back in Mecca. They couldn't travel with their belongings, and so this is why they were poor. And so they endured that for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had made them among the first to enter Jannah. But there's also another reason. Allah. By the way, there's another narration that the Prophet ﷺ said that the poor muhajirin would enter Jannah before the rich by 500 years. So the first narration is how many years? 40 years. The second narration is 500 years. Just hold that thought for a second. I'm going to come to it again. Okay? Because there seems to be a discrepancy, right? Which one is it? Is it 40 years or 500 years? We're going to talk about it in a bit. Now the Prophet ﷺ, in another narration, he explained why perhaps the poor people would enter Jannah first. So the Prophet ﷺ said, أَتَعْلَمُ أَوَّلْ زُمْرَةَ تَدْخُلُ الْجَنَّةِ مِنْ أُمَّتِي. And so he talked to Abdullah ibn Amr ibn As. So the Prophet was directing a question to him. He said, do you know أَتَعْلَمُ أَوَّلْ, the first of the groups to enter my Jannah, when? From my ummah. So he responded to the Prophet ﷺ, he said, Allahu wa Rasuluhu a'lam. Allah and His Messenger knows best. So he said, فُقَرَاء الْمُهَاجِرِينَ, the poor of the muhajirin. And he said they will come on the Day of Judgment to the doors of Jannah and they will ask for it to be open. And so the guardians of the Jannah will say, were you judged already? Like your hisab, your reckoning is done. And so they will say, for what will be judged and reckoned, we had nothing to be judged for, right? Because remember, we mentioned this hadith before. It said that our foot will not be moved from its position until we ask about several things. One of it is our wealth, where we attained it and what we spent it in. Is that right? Now these people don't have wealth. The more wealth you have, the more the questioning about it. That is the norm. And so they did not have that. So they said, why would we be judged for anything? They said, إِنَّمَا كَانَتْ أَسْيَافُنَا عَلَىٰ عَوَاتِقِنَا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ حَتَّى مُتْنَا عَلَى ذَلِكَ. That our swords were on our necks, our shoulders, kind of readiness for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala until we died. And so it would open to them. And so فَيَقِيلُونَ فِيهَا 40 عَامًا. So they'll wait in between, at the doors of Jannah. They will stay there for 40 years قَبْلَ أَن يَدْخُلَهَا النَّاسِ, before the people enter it. And the Prophet ﷺ had mentioned, he said, قُمْتُ عَلَى بَابِ الْجَنَّةِ, I stood by the door of Jannah. And so he said the majority of people that enter it are the masakeen, like the poor and the destitute. And أصحاب الجد محبوسون غير أن أصحاب النار قد أمر بهم إلى النار. And he said that the people of jidd, which means richness, wealth, they are trapped because they're being questioned. And the people of the hellfire have been taken. Now, from this hadith, we see that that the poor people will enter Jannah, in one narration by 40 years, another narration by 50 years. Now, 500 years. Now, the way we reconcile this, is to realize that the poor people are not on the same level. Are they all the same piety? No, right? Are all the rich people the same piety? No. And so depending on your piety is when you enter Jannah. And so if you look at the... so Imam Qurtubi mentioned this. He said if you look at the strength of the iman of the poor individuals and those of the people who are rich, and if the hisab was based on, or the calculations, is based on the first of the poor people, right, to enter Jannah, and the last of the rich people to enter Jannah. So we're talking about the most pious of the poor people to enter Jannah, and then the last of the rich people to enter Jannah, then the time between them is 500 years. However, if you look at the last of the poor people to enter Jannah, and the first of the rich people to enter Jannah, then the time between them is 40 years. This is how they reconcile it. Okay? Now we talked about so those are people, by the way, who are entering Jannah. So this is the first group who are entering Jannah without being punished. Okay? Now we still have two categories. Those who their hasanat and their sins are equal, and then those who are the sinners. So we're still talking about entering Jannah. So we're going to stop here, inshallah, for a few minutes, just to get ready to start for our class.